Hey, this is Yang Nguyen, and you're listening to the Immi Wealth Builder podcast, where we celebrate incredible immigrant success stories, share proven strategies, and give you actionable steps to build your wealth, freedom, and a lasting legacy. Let's go get it. Today, I'm super excited to have Tushar with us. This is a very unique story because not that every day I get to talk with a biotech startup. So I'm super excited for you to hear his story, how he built his company, and just the journey through all of that. So with that, Tushar, tell us more about your journey to the US and how did you get started in the science research space?
Yeah, thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to be over here and a great opportunity to connect with your audience. Originally from India, born in the very north, in the Himalayas, the foothills of Himalayas, in a small town. But I've grown up in multiple different corners of India. So I've lived in the West Coast, the Northeast corner, some of the West states, and then finally went to undergrad in the South. So covered all different corners of India and multiple states. And then I came to the US to pursue my grad school degree, my master's and PhD in Biomedical Engineering at UT Austin, and graduated from there and did my postdoctorate as well, and then moved over to Portland, Oregon, and worked at Intel for a couple of years. Then I was recruited by one of my grad school PIs who was a trauma care surgeon at UT Health. He was developing a device that he wanted me to come lead the technical side of things. So I moved down to Houston, worked with him and a pediatric neurosurgeon on a couple of devices and technologies, then got recruited over to Johnson & Johnson Center for Device Innovation, also in Houston, where it was the only one of its kind establishment that J&J had at that time all over the world, where they assembled a highly curated team of folks that understood medical devices, understood the clinical procedures, understood the business side of things, and could take concepts that address unmet clinical needs and take them all the way to first in human stage, possibly with the ultimate intent of either absorbing those projects within J&J's pipeline for future products or spinning them off into startups. And while working over there, I came across a novel connection between both benign and cancerous conditions of the prostate and also uterus as well, and the vascular pathophysiology, meaning how the blood flows through these organs. And that's what led to Vivify, which is my startup, where we're working on developing laparoscopic and robotic surgical devices to essentially reroute the hormone-rich blood away from these organs so that we can naturally reverse both benign and cancerous conditions, such as benign prostate hyperplasia, prostate cancer, eventually uterine fibroids, and then endometriomas.
Wow. I heard a lot of growth. I'm not sure how much that you're doing now was like really strongly related to what you did in PhD or even as an undergrad. Tell us more if there's a lot of new things that you got to pick up along the way. Because what I'm really curious to hear is that for a lot of immigrants, we may have gone to school for one thing. And now that we have left the college, undergrads, or even PhD, the work sometimes looks very different. So I'm always curious about this transformation of knowledge and how you can apply what you have learned and what are the part that you have to figure out on your own and grow as you now start your company.
For me, the only commonality between my grad school life and my current life is that I work a lot of hours. So that's the only commonality. There's in fact more overlap between my grad school, what I did in biomedical engineering, and my subsequent first job in the US, which was at Intel, where we worked on microprocessors. So I used a lot of semiconductor equipment to make some medical devices or develop concepts in my grad school that translated over to the semiconductor industry, which is Intel. But besides that, the technologies or the ideas that I worked in my grad school were completely different than what I'm working on today. And it took me a long time to really mature in terms of getting a better understanding of how the surgical procedures happen, the physicians work in an operating room, what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. When you're working in a grad school coming from another country where you don't have exposure necessarily to how doctors do surgical procedures, are not necessarily by intent, but it can just happen because you've not been exposed growing up. And trying to wrap your head around what is acceptable, how the physicians would like to see some devices, that's a whole new world. And there's a lot of education that has gone into that between my grad school and to where I'm today.
So in that sense, what was the most helpful thing for you in learning that? What were some resources that you used that you thought was helpful for this new journey?
I think for me, the most useful resource was actually shadowing physicians in the surgical procedures and
Great.
seeing how they actually operate,
Okay.
and open access to physicians' mind and brains, essentially picking on their brains and like understanding why they think in a certain fashion, what are the reasons behind their decision. I think that was pivotal.
That's super helpful. And to the audience listening, right, this is very translatable to anything else you guys are doing. His audience, the people who are using this are going to be surgeon, right? That's the actual people who are going to be using these devices. So then he's observed how they work, talk to them, figure out what are their thought process. So keep this in mind, whether you're growing a medical device or whatever else, right? Think about what your audience is needed and wanted, how they think, how they work, so that you can actually structure something that works for them. So Tushar, tell us more about that journey from translating that idea to now an actual company. How did you even start? You're like, I have this great idea. What was that next step for you?
Yeah, so for us, it was interviewing a bunch of urologists, talking to several urologists and assessing whether this is a valid concept or not. Because when we landed on that clinical evidence between the vascular pathway behind prostate, which is our leading indication, it wasn't very popular in the urology community. Most of the urologists did not know about that. And so they thought that we were crazy people trying to propose a whole new different paradigm for treating BPH and prostate cancer. And essentially, we got rejected left and right in terms of the validation of our concept to begin with. So that was the very first exercise that we did. The second exercise that we did was try to secure some sort of fundraising or funding for this. So this is one thing that I did learn from my grad school, which is how to submit grant applications.
Yeah.
We submitted a grant application to National Science Foundation for our device, which was very different than what it looks like today. And that was the intent behind submitting that grant application. We submitted thinking that this would never get funded because based from my grad school, grant fundings do not ever get funded. There's an acceptance ratio rate of like less than 20% for small business innovative research grants. And so there was a 1 in 5 shot, and we saw like, this is a crappy concept that we're proposing. It will never work. We know it will never work because the moment you put this in a human body, it will just clot off and, this is not going to work. And so we were ready for the rejection, but surprisingly, NSF funded us. So we were like, oh, crap, now we have to actually figure something out. We have this money. Now we have to do something with this money. But fortunately for us, NSF had a structure for how we spend that money, specifically encourage early stage 1 or 2 person team founders in the technology innovation domain to submit very early stage concepts. And they expect you to fail. They expect you to pivot, and they force you to talk to more customers to really hone down and drill down what the exact unmet need is and what does the patient flow look like, where does this fit in the entire procedure, what are the reimbursement rates going to be, who's going to pay for this, and how much are they going to pay for this, and is that attractive to the stakeholders, what does your strategy or pathway look like. So basically they force you to go through this whole program to really understand the ins and outs of everything. And that was phenomenal for us because that essentially laid down the foundation for what Vivify Medical is today.
Wow. When you were talking to urologists, it sounds like there was a lot of education that also need to be done because as my experience working with doctors, sometimes there is a certain way clinically that people function. And sometimes the translation between the research side and the clinical side, one can take very long, two can be pretty painful, to be honest, to get the two sides to talk together. So it makes sense that the first conversation, it was not the way. And it sounds like you guys bumps up against a lot of resistance there. You said that what you guys started and what you guys ended with was very different. Was this because of this process? And can you tell us a bit more about these differences that came out from this process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we basically started off with a device that we knew never was going to work and talked to a bunch of different urologists, got multiple feedback, told them, hey, what are your concerns? Why do you think this is not going to work? And we realized very quickly into those discussions, like a lot of urologists will just say like, this is never going to work. And we could have just taken that feedback and stopped working on it. But we instead chose to build on like, what exactly about this is not going to work? And once we started doing that, we really started getting to what some of their actual concerns were and what would be the roadblocks for that. And so we would take that feedback, we would iterate on the device and the technology. And so like, what if we did this and went back to them with that? And so slowly and steadily, we kept on iterating and testing it out and went back to them for additional feedback. And slowly, initially, who said this was never going to work started to change their minds. It's like, if you can do this way, maybe it can work. So now we are at a stage where we have some of the biggest names in the field of urology behind us. We're very excited about what we're working on.
Wow, I love that. And I think that is so translatable to anything else that other people are doing because you essentially talk to your client, the people who are going to use this, right? They give you feedback and you did a great job of actually taking those feedback in and then adjust your product to something that would work. So that's very smart as you're coming out with product, as you are doing business whatsoever, right? Think about who you're serving, implement those, and that's how you build this cycle of having loyal customers who will be willing to back your products. As a startup, I'm guessing you're wearing multiple hats. And you already share, as scientists, you are now also getting the grant. You have to write that. You have to then do the experiment. Tell us more about the team, who you have in place. Is this something that you just have to do everything yourself?
Yeah, so to be honest, I never wanted to be the CEO
Okay.
of the startup. That was never my goal or my life path that I had anticipated for myself. I've always wanted to be on the technology side, so maybe like a CDO role kind of a thing. But as I was talking to potential CEOs early in the stage of the company, there were a lot of pathways we could have chosen with this technology, which is essentially a platform technology and could be used for BPH, for prostate cancer, for male infertility, for women's health. There were a lot of other opinions. And I just saw that if I handed over the reins of the company to somebody else to make those decisions, the path that they're going to choose is not resonating with the end customer or the client. That's not the feedback that we're receiving. So ultimately, I chose to step up and, just be the CEO for the company and at least through the initial phase, take it to a point where things are materialized a little bit better and then subsequently can get it to a transition phase. But it's not easy. It's not everybody's cup of tea to go from an engineer to a CEO because it's a completely different role. It's a completely different role, completely different set of skills, and a completely different personality type that it takes to get there. For an example, as engineers, we tend to be very fixated on details. We ask very detailed questions, or we really want to know all of the details. But when you're talking to an investor for fundraise, they don't want to be bogged down by the details. You have to summarize in less than 30 seconds of what you're doing. And as a result of that, you'll miss out a lot of details, which the engineer within me cannot just let go, So there was a lot of learning that I had to do on the job. And there is no easy way to do it, but just spend time, get feedback, and I guess have excellent mentors who have been there through that journey and done that before and be coachable or be open to their feedback and really learn from them. And so that is something that I've excelled really well in doing. And that's always been the case for me, even in my grad school. I always was resourceful, and I would take the feedback and do something with that feedback. And that is the trait that I've carried forward to this day, which serves me really well.
Awesome. I'm glad that you share that. I think a lot of the audience can relate with that. I think a lot of us start out at being very good technically. We're very good at doing things ourselves, the details. My background as a scientist, I'm also very detail oriented. And so when I switched to real estate, the natural goal that I go to was underwriting analysis because I was very good with numbers, the model and the detail piece. And then similar to your experience as real estate investor and multifamily syndicator, I move over to raising capital for deals. So asking other investors to invest along with us. There are some people who actually may want to see the numbers because they are also numbers person, but the majority are in the story phase. They want to understand this overall. And so it was a really different way of communication to turn off the technical side, the numbers, because that makes sense. And I feel like I don't want to leave those numbers out to then actually just be able to craft a story so that someone will understand, right? Something I learned is that people do not invest in things that they do not understand. So you have to be able to make sure you can tell the story, right? Make sure the investors understand what they're considering. You did mention that you do have mentors that you're very great at getting feedback. How did you find these mentors that help kind of guide you along this journey from becoming the scientist, the technical doer to become a CEO of the company?
Yeah, I get this question all the time because we have some of the most phenomenal mentors on the team. When you look at the MedTech world, we have some of the biggest names that are like helping us out personally. So that's a question that I get all the time. The answer is know yourself very well.
Okay.
So dig into yourself as to really understand what are your shortcomings. Where do you fall short? And based on those shortcomings, you will immediately know what are the gaps that you have to fill in order to take your company or startup to the next step. And then go seek out people who have been there and done that and has specifically crossed that bridge and that gap, and ask them very pinpointed questions like, hey, this is where I am today. This is what I see as the issue. What is your advice? How do I solve this problem? And you do that, you get the feedback, and then don't leave it at that. Actually implement that advice and then go back to them. It's like, hey, I took your advice. I did this, which was very helpful. Now I'm running into this issue. Can you help me with this as well? And so when you keep on doing that cycle of pinpointed questions to them, eventually they will see that one, you are very open to hearing my advice. You're very respectful of that. Two, you really care about this idea, which is obviously if they agree to help you out or advise you in the first place, they are interested in that idea to begin with. And three, you're coachable, and everybody loves that. And so that is the process of somebody becoming a mentor. It does not look like going to a person who you think really regard very highly as like, hey, would you like to be my mentor? Kind of a thing. That never works out. It's almost equivalent to finding a date or, like going at a bar and finding a date. And it's like, would you like to be my date without knowing anything about them? So it's very similar process. You go with a very specific ask and get the answer to that. And over time, like you form a relationship with them.
Wow. The few minutes that you said right there, those are so important. So to the audience, you're going to want to go back and listen to that bits and piece again, because I think Tushar just give you like really important lessons on growth, right? We can always get to the next level with the right mentors in place. So I love what you said about starting first with where you're at, where you want to go, and then ask somebody to help you bridge that gap. Just similar to what you did when you were fine-tuning your device, is that get feedback, go do it, and then go back and ask like, okay, what's next, right? Because everyone loves progress. And the things that mentors hate the most is wasting their time. So I think that is such a crucial point. That's how you deepen the relationship, that's how you keep growing, right? Those are important things that you can take away to grow in whatever field you're in. Money, you can make back, you can bring back, you can keep growing, but time is something we cannot get back. So time is always our most valuable thing that is so crucial for everyone's growth. Tell me a bit more also about Vivifi Medical. So you guys have the grant, fine-tune the device. You guys now have mentors. Tell me about that trajectory of growth, because it always feels like a new territory, right? How do you then, keep Vivify Medical growing, and what's next for you with the company?
Yeah, so as any other company, you need money to keep the lights on, to pay the bills. What really grows the company is injection of capital through fundraising, and medical device or even life sciences is very capital intensive.
Yeah.
And there's a long, long journey. It's usually 10 to 15 years before you see the first dollar of revenue.
Yeah.
So it's not for the faint of heart. It's not for everybody. But what I love about MedTech is it's a privilege and honor to be in that industry because you get to impact real patients and real lives. And so for us, what we can accomplish by this is so massive that there's a lot of investors that resonate with what we're working on. It's a massive market. Benign prostate hyperplasia is one of those conditions that all men will eventually get if they live long enough. It's not a question of if, but a matter of when. And the current treatment options available to treat BPH are not just barbaric, but also very ancient. There are less invasive treatment options, but they cause recurrence in these symptoms within a couple of years, and a lot of sexual dysfunctions as side effects and urinary dysfunctions and complications. So with our vascular replumbing procedure, we essentially reverse the pathophysiology or this abnormal physiology of the prostate without any of the side effects of these current treatment options available out there. Investors are very interested in this, and suddenly they get very curious about what we're working on. So that's been a phenomenal journey for us, and we've been able to fundraise in arguably one of the most hardest times to fundraise, and have done decently well from that perspective. And that injection of capital has led to growth of the team on the technical side and like some of the other crucial roles needed for a medical device company to grow. We have done some initial clinical studies, not using our device, but the procedure down in Panama in a couple of patients. And the results from the initial patients' early stage outcomes are looking phenomenal. As a next step, essentially, we do additional patients using our technology and then keep going to the whole iteration process of making the device much better. So doing a lot of patients with much more effective and easier to use devices and getting more clinician adoption and buy-in and continue growing the company from there.
Tell me about how do you spend your time now? Because you're the CEO of the company. It seems like you still get involved on the technical side, but a lot of what you're doing is capital raising, sharing the company. How do you choose what to focus your time in that is crucial for the growth of the company?
I have a page-long list of tasks that I need to get through on any given day. So there's a lot more that needs to get done than what can be accomplished. And essentially, I just go through this exercise of like what's urgent, what's important, and what falls in that category. I don't know if you're familiar with the Eisenhower matrix, but that's one of the techniques that I use. It's like, if it is urgent and it is important, that's on the top of my priority list. That's how I start off with. There's a certain point where you have to draw the line. It's like, this is all I can do for today, and we'll get back to the lower priority list the next day.
Love that you share that. For the audience who don't know, I use this technique myself too, because similar to yours, my to-do list can be long and can be overwhelming. So the matrix, what help is there's urgent, important, and then not urgent and not important. So what I often do is I would just write down everything out of your mind on a page, and then you kind of position it on each of the quarters. So ideally, right, that last quadrant, the not important and not urgent should not be what you're doing. And then you really want to focus on that first quadrant, right? Urgent and important. And ideally, the goal is to shift things out of the urgent side so that they can go into the important but not urgent. I don't know, but for me, sometimes things are still live a lot in that first quadrant for sure. Just the way the business works, I think. I definitely want to close out with asking you a question that a previous guest left behind. Your question is, if you could go back and whisper something to your younger self, what would it be?
You're doing great.
Oh, I love that.
I attended a keynote by Jensen Huang, who's the CEO of NVIDIA.
Oh.
And he mentioned this as well. he got this question as well. Like, if you go back and talk to your younger version, what would you tell him? And he was like, I wouldn't say anything, because at that time we were foolish and we were ignorant. And that is a superpower that a lot of people don't recognize. Because if you're aware of all the risks and how hard and challenging entrepreneurship can be, you will never take that step. So sometimes your ignorance and blissfulness about it and your passion as a result of that can be your biggest asset.
Man, I love that. I fully agree. When I jumped into my first project, it was a foreclosure property. No water, no electricity, no HVAC, and we had foundation issue. And to your point, I was clueless. I didn't know how hard it was gonna be. So because of that, I jumped in, being resourceful, figure it out, and it was fine. But obviously, if I had known how hard it would, I may not have just jumped in. So important point that you share there. I would love for you to share a charity or cause that is close to your heart. And to the audience, if this has really added value to you, please go consider, donate to the charity and cause to support. And thanks to Tushar for being here today. So tell us about a charity or cause that we can support on your behalf.
Absolutely. I'm on the board of directors for a nonprofit organization based out of over here in Houston called Spectrum Fusion, where it is led by this wonderful lady called Heidi, who is a speech pathologist. And she takes adults that are on the spectrum and are unable to really get any jobs or any real life world opportunities and train them to be really good, productive workers in the field of media. And more importantly, have communication skills so that they can communicate with each other in a manner that you output some amazing media projects. And they've done like a documentary on deer cancer and wonderful things that a lot of adults on the spectrum cannot, because it's a rare talent to be able to communicate with other adults on the spectrum and coordinate on a project. And so I'm very passionate about that. And if you have the capacity to donate to them, I would be very grateful. If you cannot, and you know somebody who is not neurodivergent or on the spectrum and are looking for like-minded individuals that they can benefit from, please check it out.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing that. How can the audience get in touch with you or find out more about your company and follow you on this journey?
Yeah, the easiest for connecting with me is LinkedIn. For my company, you can just look up on the website and submit a contact through the contact form over there. It's vivifymedical.com.
Awesome. I will also put all that in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here today. It was a blast listening to you share about your journey, and I look forward to learning more about Vivifi Medical and the growth you expect in the next few years. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you guys in the next episode. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.